Hello, good morning and welcome to today's Movers and Shakers virtual event in partnership with the NatWest Group. My name's Natasha Salter and I'm Managing Director of Movers and Shakers. Now it's brilliant to have almost 500 people attending today's event. Welcome to you all, to our members and to newcomers. For those of you who don't know Movers and Shakers, we're in our 27th year with the UK's leading property and construction networking forums. We run events across the UK, breakfast forums, conferences, and now virtual events on our community platform and app, which you're watching today. So over the last 18 months, we've set up our community platform for the purpose of running virtual events. We have now 60 plus hours on-demand video for you all to watch and constant market insights via our knowledge hubs. And obviously you can connect, chat, and do business and collaborate. So welcome to you all today. Today's event is on delivering net zero carbon buildings, a new skill set for the future. We're delighted to be working with NatWest Group on this event. Now, I'm sure most of you know, but NatWest is the principal banking partner for COP26. They show their commitment and their dedication to tackling climate crisis through this. And they're positioning themselves as a leading bank, understanding that the finance sector has a big role to play in the transition to the low carbon economy. They're working with government, with regulators, with other businesses and society to get to the position of a low carbon economy. They, in fact, in their own operations became carbon neutral in 2020 and aim to be climate positive in 2025. So excellent news there. Now we welcome today Rishi Madlani, who is the Head of Sustainable Finance at NatWest Group, who's going to be chairing today's discussion. And I know Rishi's going to be introducing the topic in full and indeed all of our contributors. But from me and from Movers and Shakers, welcome to Ewan Norris, who's from Scottish Power, Charlie Foster, NatWest Group, Joanne Wheeler, who's from the UK Green Building Council, Mark Atherton from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and Jamie Hall from ISS Sustainability. Welcome to you all at today's event. Very quickly, the format of today, I'm going to hand to Rishi. We have a panel discussion session, and there is the opportunity for you to ask questions in the usual way. So do type them into the question area. Rishi will do his best to accommodate as many of these as possible. We also have polls today, so please do complete the 3 polls. And the idea is that after this session, we're going to write up a brief with the polls results. We're going to send it all to you, but equally the UK Green Building Council and NatWest are going to take the mandate to COP26 and it'll be part of the opinion forming. So thank you so much. And I'm going to hand over now to Rishi. Thank you from me and enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, and good morning and welcome all. So as Lee said, I'm Rishi Madlani, Head of Climate and Sustainable Finance at NatWest Group. So firstly, thank you for making time in your busy diaries this morning to join our panel discussion on the skills gap for delivering net zero buildings. It's a super important topic, especially as we approach COP. I'm joined by a panel of distinguished experts who will share their views on the skills needed now and in the future to meet the challenge of radical transformation across the built environment. Please do post questions. We want this to be an interactive session. I will take the panel through a few questions first, but we really want to hear from you. So we've all heard about the various climate laws and legislation. The EU's commitments to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, or the UK's commitments here in the UK by 2035 to have cut carbon emissions by 78%. These are huge undertakings, but they're quite abstract. And to meet these commitments, we're going to need to halve some of the energy use of our buildings over the next 9 years by making buildings energy efficient and fit for the future. We're going to change some of the ways we behave and the way we use buildings. They're absolutely essential, transforming homes, offices into energy efficient net zero carbon buildings. This will require strategic thinking. Some of you have those levers to control in the organizations you work in, but it will involve us working together to think about new materials, new products, but also require green jobs, greener jobs that require new skills, as well as climate decision making and having this embedded into every one of our roles. It's not going to be a climate team that fixes the climate challenge. It'll be climate leaders like any of you on the panel, those on the panel today and those attending today, who will be embedding this in their roles. So there's a huge amount of work to do, and the challenge is too great for any one organisation to tackle alone. And this is really something that requires collaboration in every essence. So to understand and address some of the skills gap, we've brought together a distinguished panel. Lee's taken you through some of the panels, so let's jump into the questions here. But I want to first start the discussion with Joanne. So welcome, Joanne. Thinking about the solutions to achieve net zero buildings, what does the job skill shortage look like today?
Thanks, Rishi, and morning, everybody. So for those of you who may not know who UK Green Building Council are, we're an industry-led network with a mission to radically transform the sustainability of the built environment. We represent the industry's current and future leaders who are striving for transformational change in this area. I've been at UKGBC quite a long time, almost since this inception, so I've worked on a wide range of sectors and issues over the last decade or so. My current focus is on the retrofit of existing buildings and particularly homes, and supporting local and regional authorities to take a bit of a leading role on retrofits. So we've done things like produce a retrofit playbook, which is guidance for local authorities and how they can drive and facilitate retrofit, and very much drawing from the very good work going on in Mark's team in Greater Manchester and other regions who are kind of pioneering in this area. So I guess in answer to the question, as Rishi said, I'd start by saying addressing sustainability and climate change and the ecological crisis is now really very much part of all of our jobs. It's no longer a kind of add-on for those of us with sustainability in our job title. It really needs to be a fundamental part of every business and every organisation and everything that we do. So encouragingly, our membership at UKGBC has grown by, I think, over 100 organisations just since January this year. And I'd say that the appetite for knowledge and collaboration around net zero and sustainability and things like nature-based solutions has never been higher, which is clearly brilliant and a very positive sign. However, on the skills and jobs shortage specifically, I'd say there is still a really very severe shortage of sustainability skills in the built environment sector. For example, thinking about the 29 million homes that need to be retrofitted over the next 20 years in this country, there is a severe lack of people who can offer that kind of comprehensive whole house retrofit service, sort of taking the householder through from an end-to-end service and making it as easy as possible for them to upgrade their homes, and crucially, of course, making sure that the right retrofit measures are delivered in the right home in the right way, so that they're not actually making the homes worse. So I'd say that's a real skills shortage. On the new build side, I'd say developers know very much that net zero is coming their way. So the proactive ones among them are already gearing up to meet that challenge. But we definitely need greater awareness around things like whole life carbon, so the embodied carbon of construction materials, because as the sort of operational energy, the energy in use of our new buildings falls, the embodied carbon in the materials is going to become ever more important. So I think those are the two areas I'd identify as sort of skills needs areas, people who can offer that comprehensive retrofit service, and skills and knowledge around the whole life carbon issue in new build.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I think there's a real demand for those skills, and actually with unemployment as high as 10% in certain inner city areas, there's hopefully a chance to create some, train future people to have those skills. Absolutely. So we've got our first audience poll, which should be popping up now. If it's not, please bear with us and it will come through. But the question is asking, what do you think is the biggest skill shortage to achieving net zero buildings? So please vote on that and we will feed back results towards the end. So my second question comes to Ewan from Scottish Power. So thank you for joining us today. So the second question is, we know that retrofitting homes and buildings is a key part of building a more sustainable built environment. What do you think are the areas that we don't have enough the people with the right green skills?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me onto the panel. I'm delighted to be here. So my name's Ewan Norris, Head of Smart Solutions and Smart Cities for Scottish Power. And just building on what Joanne has said there, there is obviously a current skills gap. And I think one of the, before we get into the technologies and how we deliver, what's necessary for the net zero, I think there's probably a little bit of skills knowledge required and a gap around what needs to be delivered, particularly when you're looking at retrofit homes and the timescales that are emerging. For example, as we transition and electrify more of our heating requirements, we must recognise that the installation of a ground source or air source heat pump is a specialised and highly skilled role. And it's not necessary, you just can't be a gas engineer one day and transition very quickly to put in a heat pump. It's a completely different skill set. So, with the ambition to grow the fleet across the UK, we need to match that with, the skills and the ability to train people coming behind that. I don't think we can deny that there is currently a long way to go in achieving those adequate numbers of skilled labour to be able to install infrastructure and technology that is necessary. But the pool of electrical engineers, for example, with installers of heat pumps, as I've mentioned, has to grow significantly. As we develop our ambitious targets and commitment to delivering net zero, we must match this with a strategy to deliver the skilled labour that is necessary to achieve it. I think the two have to go hand in hand. And I've got a view that green skills and career pathways, it must be embedded into our education process across the UK to help meet climate change targets. And we have to, as an industry, showcase, the range of well-paid and exciting roles that are emerging for not only young people, but existing marketplace and people who are already in employment. We've seen the issues in recent weeks of a lack of skilled labour and what that causes, to society and the impact it has. But net zero, unfortunately, won't just last a week or two. It's a fundamental shift and requires upskilling of the UK workforce for the 21st century and a green economy. So I've mentioned it in a heat pump, and I know, Joanne, because we talk about retrofitting homes, but this is a significant undertaking in itself. It requires a high degree of engineering skills, and also, as Joanne mentioned, you need the ability to communicate with whoever's receiving that, to educate them on how it operates and how best to maximise its efficiency. So the range of skills that are necessary are huge. So from my side of things, we need skills covering engineering, project management, construction, environmental planning, and with a growing reliance on real-time systems and digitalisation of the energy sector and how people are interacting with their energy, not just their energy supplier. Our industry is actually needing an increased need for IT skilled people who can build systems, improve security, and thereafter operate and maintain the system. So there's a significant issue and one which needs addressed, but I would say with haste on skills.
And Ewan, and I really like that point. Actually, it's a real range of skills that we need people to have that climate angle in. And we've seen this with our Sustainable Futures Network at NatWest. We've got 2,000 young people really keen to do climate in their jobs. And hopefully that's a good sign that there are those people who want to do those jobs coming through. So my next panelist is Jamie from ISS. So when we talk about climate jobs, what low-carbon jobs, what springs to mind, and what are the blockers preventing us from creating these jobs that we've talked about already in the built environment focused on decarbonisation?
Thanks, Rishi, and good morning to the rest of the panelists and everybody joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here. Just quickly, my name's Jamie Hall, and I'm the UK Director of Energy and Sustainability at ISS UK. I guess my role is kind of focused on two areas. So firstly, I'm working with ISS to help shape our internal sustainability strategy. So we've been working really hard to kind of think about things, really important topics like net zero, and we've just actually announced our own net zero strategy for scope 1 and 2 by 2030 amongst a number of other initiatives. So we're doing really important things like electrifying our vehicles, which is a key part of our emission footprint. But then I guess the other part of my role is focused on helping our customers achieve their own objectives. So we offer kind of direct sustainability services to our customers and help, unpick this particular challenge on behalf of our clients, which is exciting and also it's I guess it's just really exciting to work with so many different customers, all of which are at different stages of this journey. So and finally, more recently, I've just been leading a global program to help implement this approach across ISS. So when it comes to low carbon jobs, Rishi, I think in the built environment, I guess simply you could just define this as anybody that's got the ability to influence carbon emissions. But that's quite a broad statement, and I guess it gets a bit more confusing because, as we know, carbon's got the ability to cut right through an organization. So there's that to consider, but also then the different stages of the building's life cycle, which I think a couple of the panelists have mentioned today. Pre-construction, that we're talking about town planners, we're talking about architects and engineers. But when you get to the post-construction part of a building's life cycle, for me, it's really, really clear that we're going to need a joined up effort throughout that whole stage of the built environment, and really strong alignment through the organization. And that starts at the boardroom, setting the right ambition and providing the governance. There's clearly sustainability professionals that are going to be involved, helping to set the strategy and track performance. We need people like fleet managers to help transition electric vehicles, as I was just mentioning, providing charging infrastructure, which again is new to many people. You've clearly then got people like energy managers, engineers, designers working to implement, identify OPEX and CAPEX carbon reduction initiatives. And they need to work alongside the property professionals and the facilities professionals to make sure that the property strategy is being delivered alongside the workplace agenda. And then, clearly procurement have got a big part to play as well, because, they're going to be helping to purchase the renewable energy that we're going to need in our buildings. But they're also going to be helping to manage our supply chain. And I know we're going to talk about Scope 3 later, but that's clearly a massive consideration in this whole agenda. And then I think Joe mentioned, post when the building is being knocked down, we need to think about that kind of demolition part of it, and think about circular solutions so that we can reuse and recycle materials and prevent unnecessary wastage. So I named quite a few roles there, and to be honest with you, that's just to name a few. And I think one of the things that jumps out to me is that for many of the people that I've just mentioned, net zero is going to be kind of new to them, and it's only, and I think we've touched upon it, it's going to be part of their role. So from a people perspective, whether it's senior executives or the security guard turning off the lights to save some energy, we need to educate and we need to empower people at all levels of the organization, so they're really informed of the goals in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and we're clearly supporting them. So whether it's training, communication, engagement, or clearly defined roles and responsibilities, I think all of that is key. There's clearly then the point around the skills gap and what we're going to need in the industry over the next 10, 20, 30 years. As we've just heard, this isn't going anywhere. It's going to be around for a long time. So I think proper planning around entry routes into the industry and mapping our needs from an educational standpoint is going to be key. So I guess from my perspective, some of the biggest challenges in the built environment actually relate to skills and also organizationally, as opposed to being down to a particular technology or innovation, because I think many of the solutions that we actually do have are already in existence. So I guess to summarize, I think the transition to net zero is actually it's a big change or transformation program, and that is difficult for most people or most businesses to achieve, and it's going to require a different set of skills to business as usual, and that's heightened when you consider the rate of change that we're going to be seeing across the built environment, because most organizations are committing to net zero targets to 2030 or even sooner for scopes 1 and 2. So the time is kind of now to act, really.
Brilliant, Jamie. Rallying calls for us all. And I like that sort of analogy you painted from leadership at the top to across the organisation. I think that's something that really I want audience members to take away today. A slightly different tact. We know that climate action needs to be place-based, but the nature of buildings, they are physically located in places, and I think it's really important, the important role local government can play in this. So government policies are looking to shorten the skills gap and reaching net zero buildings. What more can local authorities do to help create a green jobs market that helps support decarbonisation of the built environment? And obviously over to Mark from the Greater Manchester Authority.
Morning, everybody. So Mark Atherton, I'm Director of Environment for Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Combined Authority brings together 10 local authorities of Greater Manchester with an elected mayor. I think we probably need to understand the skills dilemma before we dip into what local authorities can do. So the wider construction sector workforce is already being quite squeezed. The labour market is in short supply, partly due to COVID, partly due to Brexit pressures, and there's been quite a lot of government funding going into retrofit over a very short period of time. So that means that qualified workers are in fairly high demand, order books are full, and therefore smaller companies in particular see no incentive in upskilling or learning any new skills when they've already got enough work to keep them going for the next 12 months. Secondly, I think the sector has had a structural prevalence of self-employed and domestic retrofits, so a tendency towards smaller companies. And also there has been an emphasis in recent years on construction hyper-specialization to drive costs down. So, specialist joinery firms focusing specifically on roofing, stairing, internal walls, for example. And actually, when it comes to retrofit activity, I think there's a growing requirement for systemic thinking and bring all of that together. And it's the point that Joanne raised earlier. We need the people who are able to look across energy efficiency, energy generation and heat decarbonisation, and be able to bring all of those into a whole house or a whole building approach and do it systemically. So what can local authorities do? Well, I think there are 4 things that I'm going to talk about. One is to stimulate demand. The second is to convene people and organisations together to create that system-based approach. The third is the ability to try and fund and support green skills development in schools, particularly for those local authorities that have devolved education budgets. And then finally, we can use public procurement to also stimulate demand and create change. So the first of those is around stimulating demand. In Greater Manchester, we've been successful this year in securing about 80 million pounds worth of public sector decarbonisation schemes. That's 156 public buildings with a retrofit. About 27 million of Green Homes Grant, which is domestic fuel poor retrofit. And we're developing a self-made Retrofit Accelerator, which is aimed at the able to pay market. And in these ways, we can stimulate demand in the existing local supply chain, which creates that pull to try and get more people into the sector. It creates surety, if you like, within the sector, that there is going to be demand into the future. And therefore, it starts to change employers' views about their ability and willingness to upskill people and reskill people into the trade. The second is convening ability. So local authorities are able, in a given geography, to pull together skills providers with sector companies, with public sector. And we've done this in Greater Manchester under a Merrill Retrofit Task Force. Actually, a number of the panel's organisations are represented on that task force. And it does exactly that. And the benefit of it is that you can start to encourage people outside of the public sector, housing providers, for example, to get involved in the process. For those local authorities that continue to have housing stock, which is dwindling now, you can start there, and you can start where local authorities have some control, but you can also bring together housing providers to bid for things like the Social Homes Decarbonisation Fund, which is currently a process that we're going through and trying to bring 9 to 10 housing providers together to bid collectively for that. And thirdly, for those authorities that have it, utilising something like the education budget to be able to fund green skills development directly in FE in colleges is something that we're starting to do. Not all local authorities have that ability, and in those that don't, I think it's about lobbying government to try and ensure that they are linking together those funds for higher education directly to sector support, so that we're joining those two things together and making that link between where the demand and where the supply needs to be raised. I think anybody who gets involved in insulation, I think that's a green job. I think, as one of the panelists said earlier, young people want to get involved in this, but I do think that we need to try and make construction sexy again. I think it's seen in too many people's eyes as being a blue collar job. And actually, as I said earlier, when it comes to retrofit and smart homes, I think we need to change the nomenclature. We need to change the narrative. Retrofit seems like retrograde, and I think it's got a bit of a negative connotation to it. We need to talk about smart future homes, and really it should be highly specialised jobs, particularly for those that are making that smart bit work. So we need to stimulate that demand within schools and support teachers with resources to communicate that to the students. And then finally, we can use public procurement to leverage skills development. So this is regularly used by some local authorities, but sometimes it's positioned in slightly the wrong way under like a social value commitment. And this is often passed down from a prime bidder for local authority funds down to subcontractors who then don't deliver things like apprenticeships. And I think local authorities need to be stricter with the primes and make sure that the procurement weightings in public procurement really value the idea that companies that are engaged in public works, publicly funded works, are actively encouraging young people to come into the trade through apprenticeships and other mechanisms.
Brilliant, Mark. I really like that. And I like the structure around how you're using all the levers the local authority has. And if your local authority, to those in the audience today, isn't doing that, speak to them, challenge them. They should be convening, and we need to do a lot more place-based action. I also really like that idea about making this sexy again. When I look at how Tesla has transformed the vehicle movement, not everyone will own a Tesla, not everyone will be able to afford one, but actually it's got people thinking about this, and we need to think about the equivalent in our own smart homes in the future, and that's a really powerful message. I've been told to remind everyone the audience polls are ongoing. It's a live discussion in the polls tab, and we're getting some initial results through. So the second one is also live there. So what do you think the government should be doing more to support the decarbonisation of the built environment? Last but not least on our panel, I'm turning to Charlie now. So financial institutions are required to monitor flows of finance against green sustainable activity, as we both know, painfully so sometimes. Do you think that companies should have a minimum threshold on the percentage of green jobs? And do you think this will help drive sustainability across the built environment?
Morning, everybody. Just as a quick sort of introduction to my role in terms of the climate element of my role at NatWest. So I'm in charge of leading our sustainability strategy for our real estate business. That's really focused on how we can support our real estate customers respond to the climate challenge and transition to a low carbon economy. And the first step of that is actually to bring a better understanding of the energy efficiency of the buildings that they own and run, and looking at the associated regulatory landscape under MEES to try and drive some of that demand that Mark actually mentioned earlier. And we're also looking at how we can work with other stakeholders to accelerate the agenda on climate. So we've got various partnerships in place, again, with some of the panelists here. And then we've also launched a cross-sector coalition earlier this year with British Gas, Worcester Bosch and Shelter. And that's looking specifically at how to improve the UK's building energy efficiency and helping consumers understand what the choices they have to decarbonise their homes and commercial buildings. In terms of the point around implementing a green jobs quota for every business, I'm slightly hesitant on that. And as you've heard from Mark, I think creating the demand is actually key to driving the conditions for businesses to see the commercial case to invest in skills. I think that's a better focus than job quotas. I think if the commercial drivers exist, I would actually expect the various parts across the supply chain to respond willingly. And then we've got a better chance of ensuring higher quality apprenticeships and longevity of green roles. And also then that candidates are attracted by the potential for proper career progression. I think using the regulatory stick of quotas risks a more sort of temporary and lower quality experience for people. But that's also not to say that I don't think there needs to be a recognition of kind of contribution to investing in green skills and the training and building out green career pathways, as Ewan mentioned. And I think a further point against quotas is that, as both Joe and Ewan brought out, is the green jobs required. They're not even across every part of the supply chain. So any minimum levels of quotas would need to be specifically attached to the areas where gaps have been identified. And I think key to that also is answering the question of whether the response required is an upskilling and expanding of existing roles, so connecting existing skills to the green agenda, or if the need is to create completely new roles. And if I look at NatWest as an example, so absolutely we've brought in specialists who have been just tasked with focusing on the green agenda, but almost more importantly has been the really hard work we've done to upskill all our colleagues so that they can provide the support to customers across all sectors, and also to embed green considerations in everything we do as a bank. So I think as time goes on, there will be an element of green in everybody's roles across every industry. But in summary, I think the attention should be on how to stimulate demand for the creation of and investing in green roles.
I think that's a really valid point. I mean, as Charlie comes across as very modest, but she's responsible for 30 billion of NatWest's exposure to the real estate sector in her day job. And actually, when I retrofit climate into her job, and I'm delighted to be able to recruit her as part of our carbon army in NatWest to help us deliver some of this, because actually it has to be everyone's job. There is no way a small team of climate specialists can actually deliver some of this. So next, I'm heading back to Ewan. So energy is obviously key to decarbonising, as we all know, and the renewable energy market has grown and been a huge growth story for the UK, and it's become more competitive. What more can be done to educate tenants, occupiers, about their behaviour and usage, and then how those have an impact on climate change?
So obviously competition is good. It drives economies of scale and provides consumers choice. But you know, this is such an important topic not only just for the day-to-day consumer, but for us all as society. So that competition has to be delivered in a responsible manner, across the energy sector in particular, as we support customers reduce their carbon footprint. So, it was mentioned earlier on by Jamie, I think one of the first things is organisations in that sector, we have to look inwardly and ensure that we are taking the necessary and responsible steps to reduce our own carbon footprints. And it's only by, being the exemplar and moving forward in the right direction as our organisations can we then turn to start to educate consumers in terms of what they need to do in terms of their homes, their business and their day-to-day life. So we as an organisation, we follow the science-based targets, and we have short, medium and long-term objectives to reduce our carbon emissions and prevent the worst impacts of climate change. So that's guided by the science. And I think, the energy industry, particularly the world I'm working in at the moment, is obviously, again, it's been very vocal in recent weeks and months, around, some of the challenges that we're seeing in the industry, and that, and the choice that customers are having to make. You might not be able to afford, to put in the necessary, latest technology to reduce your carbon footprint, but you certainly may take decisions around how you procure and who you procure energy from to work towards that. For example, taking a clean energy tariff. And obviously, we've been very vocal in some of the issues we've seen around that in the industry, where, like greenwashing, we've got to put it on the table. Greenwashing is this. And companies are, are selling a false narrative in terms of, how they're supplying. So that's an education in itself. That's the start. We have to start by, being responsible as energy companies, and I'm pleased to say Scottish Power is 100% green, and we can take that message forward. But as we move into people's homes, it was mentioned, we're looking at transportation, electrification of our transportation, our heat. And actually how we actually generate power in homes and businesses. And it's going to be very, it's a minefield that's huge. And it was mentioned earlier on by Mark, you need to take that, holistic view. It's not just one, you can do one. It's actually how do you create change in your lifestyle. And there is a huge education piece around that. And I mentioned it earlier in my response to my previous question, putting in the technology is not enough. So I'm working with local authorities, I'm working with housing associations. And the conversation isn't just about the technology, the heat pump, or it's about how do we actually take the customer through the journey. It's a big upheaval in their own home, particularly if you're a tenant of a social house, where it's not through particular choice. This is something that's been put into your home. So that's a huge upheaval for them and their family, and then how they use that thereafter is a good example. Heat pump, I keep going back to heat pump because it resonates with what I'm doing, and I was only doing it yesterday. But the big thing is about the education of the householder, because if you hear that heat pump kick on, you think, oh, that's costing me money, I might switch it off. But actually, you're not going to get the advantage of it because it's little and often. So education is huge in terms of the energy transition to support householders, who might be fuel poor already, and then they're moving to something new technology. It might be scary, and they might back off from it in relation to concerned about what it might cost them. So we've got a responsibility across the industry to ensure that we're putting in the right solutions in the first instance, and thereafter there's a support package for consumers, particularly in the build environment, across the social landlord estates. And if we get that right, then it will start to, give people trust and confidence that they can make their own transition, and they're making a long-term investment as well. It's imperative that we don't make significant mistakes, because then we'll lose ground in relation to meeting our net zero targets. But education is great, competition is good, but it's got to be done in a responsible manner, and people have got to be. It's got to be people-centric at the heart of that. And we can go in, change a property, upgrade it, but we can't leave it there. Some people will need a little bit of hand-holding beyond that, and we've got to be prepared to do that. So education is key. And that starts to go back to what we're saying in the schools as well. I mean, my 10-year-old comes in and challenges me for the car that I drive at the moment, and what we do in the house. And I think that's brilliant, because it's in her psyche already, and that will transfer into her life. So I think we're getting there, and it starts in the schools and how we actually take people. So we can use that to educate the mum and dads in terms of climate change and how they can use these things.
Brilliant, Ewan, and I love the fact that little Miss Norris is challenging you, rightfully so. And actually, you know, when we reflect back to pre-lockdown, 18 months ago, our kids were walking out of schools around the country. I must admit, it helped probably around our boardroom, the pressure put on some of our executives around the voices being heard. And we need to rechannel that and almost win hearts and minds on this. So our final audience poll is now live in the live discussion section of the poll tab. Please do click in on that. Have you moved to a renewable energy tariff in your own home? We're going to do the final set of questions to some of the panelists, and then please, I see some of the audience questions coming in. Put your questions to us. We're ready, raring to go, as you've heard already today. So my next question goes to Joanne. How can the industry work together to create more green jobs that accelerates the journey to net zero buildings without greenwashing? We've already touched on the big challenge we have here, and how do we measure successes of these ventures?
Yeah, I think, I guess perhaps unsurprisingly, my answer to the collaboration question would be join UK GBC or organisations like ours and get involved in our work. So we spend a lot of our time convening different organisations facing similar challenges, come together and work through those collaboratively, and it's really a very powerful thing. An example of that is, and Lee mentioned our work in the run-up to COP. So we're running a task group at the moment to produce a whole life carbon roadmap, which will be launched at the COP event. There's over, I think, 70 organisations involved in that collaborative process, you know, drawing up recommendations for industry, for government, across all the different sectors of the built environment. So it's kind of a very powerful way to get involved, I think, to get actively involved in task groups like ours. We also do things like host solutions portals, so members can learn from each other about kind of changing dynamics, changing how traditional commercial models are changing within the industry, and learn from each other about how other businesses are tackling similar challenges. So yeah, again, I would say kind of sign up to organisations like ours to work collaboratively, because it's clear that, as many people have said on the panel already, no organisation can do this alone. We all need to work together and collaboratively and learn from each other. On the greenwashing issue, it is a real challenge, I think, and measuring success is very hard. I guess my answer would be that the collection and analysis of data is really crucial. So on Retrofit, for example, we're working with local authorities to help them to collect data when they undertake major retrofit projects, so that they can understand and monitor the real impacts of those projects, how much carbon energy is being saved, what the indoor air quality is before and after the renovation, how many jobs are being created on site, those kind of very measurable and tangible impacts. Because I think it's only really by collecting data and analysing it and understanding what works and what doesn't work, and then feeding that back into policy and decision-making processes, that we can be sure that we're taking the right action and that we're avoiding greenwash. But it's not easy.
Brilliant, Joe. Huge plug for being members of the UK Green Building Council. We were members for a number of years, and we think there's some excellent content and excellent collaboration provided through that. So thank you very much for that. Jamie, next over to you. We said we talk about Scope 3 and supply chains in particular, a crucial assess addressing climate change. What are the skills gap in the built environment supply chains?
Sure. Hopefully you can all still see me. Good to see that the building has taken the initiative to turn off the lights during the session, so it's obviously contributing to lower consumption, which is good. Either that or one of the security guards that I was just mentioning earlier is playing a bit of a trick on me. So yeah, I think it's fascinating actually. It's great to hear some of the dialogue so far. Rishi, I'm going to steal that carbon army line. I think that's one way to make the jobs a bit sexier again. I quite like that. So yeah, for me, when it comes to Scope 3, I think I'd like to start again with that kind of organizational viewpoint, because, you know, clearly we need to see a strong alignment between, you know, your corporate or you know, organizational sustainability objectives and, you know, your supply chain and procurement policies. So, you know, you need to see the boardroom agenda again being reflected in decisions that are being made, and you need kind of strong governance and communication around that. I think that just goes without saying. When it comes to engaging with the supply chain as well, I think we do need to see a shift in approach. So instead of focusing on cost and compliance, I think we need to take a more holistic view and you know, looking at an organization's ESG credentials and how that aligns to your own is always a good place to start, and is particularly relevant for today's conversation. So when it comes to the suppliers themselves, I think anybody that's looked at this in any detail will know that, there are varying levels of ESG maturity across the supply chain, and that it will vastly differ from supplier to supplier and sector to sector as well. And unfortunately, the reality is that for many organizations, the short-term priority is focusing on scope 1 and 2 in terms of identifying what they need to do and the delivery associated with that. And that is a perfectly good place to start, but we also know that scope 3 represents a big challenge and also the biggest proportion of many organizations' footprint. So yeah, but unfortunately, most companies have not necessarily considered scope 3, and are still in it. And if they have, I guess they're still in the the discovery or the discovery phase or the early engagement with their suppliers. But that being said, I think focusing on the areas of biggest spend or the suppliers with the biggest impact is clearly the best place to start. So when it comes to the challenges, I think the biggest one that jumps out to me is probably the fact that scope 3 data itself is notoriously poor. The quality varies a lot, and I also think we're missing common data standards in terms of how we track, store, or present that information. It seems to be wildly different from organization to organization. I also do think that there's a big opportunity here, though, from a technology perspective, to digitize a lot of that process and around data capture and reporting. And if we can automate and streamline what can be a very spreadsheet intensive exercise, then I think that will help a lot. And the good news is that there are platforms out there that can support with that. I also think there's a big opportunity to adopt circular principles in the supply chain. So rethinking the way that we use resources and looking for opportunities to partner and collaborate with organizations in order to reduce unnecessary waste throughout the building life cycle. And I guess the final point for me on this one would be that the pandemic, Brexit, and even more recent events, have highlighted the reliance that we've got on our supply chains and what can happen when they fail. So, I think with all things in life, it's important to take a measured view with regard to supply chain and to strike a healthy balance between ambition, costs, ESG, resilience, and diversity in the supply chain.
Brilliant, Jamie, and consider yourself a recruit to the carbon army. You're part of it now. Actually, that probably is a nice flow into the next question about the sense of urgency, and then we'll come to one final comment from the panel on COP and their expectations of it before we open to audience questions. So keep those excellent questions coming in. So Charlie, obviously in August we saw the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report launched. It was a scientific assessment detailing the implications, future risks of climate change. What's your biggest takeaway from this IPCC report? I suspect not everyone will have read it page to page, but I'd love your view on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think absolutely the bit that comes through loud and clear is the urgency of the situation, and that we're beyond the point of just being able to make pledges. So that's just not sufficient now. I think the focus has got to be therefore on specific activity associated with achieving net zero, and that now needs to be significantly accelerated on a much larger scale and be comprehensive across all sectors and areas of life. And I think this point was touched on at various points during this talk today, is that collaboration has got to be key, and that means across industries, and in order for us to reach the sort of suitable solutions. And the built environment, that will require all stakeholders to play their part, and absolutely accept that policy and regulation are a really important factor, but waiting for that can't be an excuse for a lack of action from others.
Brilliant, instilling a sense of urgency, and that's probably a nice segue into our final question on COP. Obviously, it's less than a month to go to COP. I'd like each of the panelists to give me their reflection on what they would like to see come out of the COP meetings and how attainable we think they are. So Mark, I'm coming to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks. I think, obviously COP is an international negotiation about setting international budgets, but bringing it down to what I would like to see come into the UK is that recognition, as we've spoken about today, about the sense of urgency from government in particular to make some long-term commitments to really change the way that the market currently works. Now, that could be funding commitments, but it also could be regulatory commitments or policy commitments. But it is vital now that we set out a long-term, well, actually a medium-term, because we haven't got long-term to wait, roadmap about how this is going to work, to give confidence to the industry and to the skills providers that this is the change that's coming, and you need to get on board with this. So I'm hoping that having the UK presidency of COP joint presidency will stimulate the government to think about making those sorts of long-term commitments. And it's not just about reducing carbon from our buildings, although that's really important. We now also need to think about how do we adapt our physical environment, our built infrastructure, to cope with the climate change that is now unavoidable. So how are we going to make sure that our buildings and our infrastructure is climate resilient also needs to be part of that picture.
Brilliant, Mark. Over to you, and as a fellow lead sponsor of COP.
Yeah, no, obviously Scottish Power Retrofit Group, are proud to be kind of principal partners of COP, but similar to what Mark has just spoken about there, we need to leave COP this year with a clear sense that nothing short of immediate action in delivering low carbon technologies and climate change across all aspects of our lives and society will be acceptable, and it requires bold decisions to be taken. The electricity sector is best placed to probably decarbonise the economy through greater electrification, as we've talked about across transportation, buildings. But, that will only happen if there's clear sense of urgency to do stuff. We need to put a flag in the ground to deliver. We don't have time to pontificate and navel gaze. We just need to get on and do stuff and support, everybody across society in making that change. And I think we've got, as I say, about these bold decisions, to actually transition, to the low carbon and reduce the worst effects of climate change. There have to be, some, bold, no compromising decisions. And I touch on, I mentioned electrification, but there'll be areas where electrification is not possible. So, for example, heavy fleet, industrial processes, hydrogen will come into the mix as well. But we can't compromise on that being anything other than green. I think, putting in brown or blue hydrogen is just simply a sticky plaster, and that won't eradicate our carbon impact. So that's the sort of bold decisions that we need to take. So, we're enthused. We're invested in COP26. We see it as an important event, and it's going to be, it's becoming one of the clear, it's critical for our future, the COP26, probably more than any other COP. So it's probably a long way of saying simply setting ambitious targets, but most importantly, a clear roadmap and see demonstrable action post 26 is what I'm really looking for. That's only a conference over a number of days. The real COP26 has to happen thereafter, and we need to just get on and deliver.
Brilliant. I'm going to come to Jamie, Joe and Charlie. Can I ask you just to be a bit brief so we can get as many audience questions in as well? So Jamie, you next. What does our ISS want to see?
Yeah, I think the latest IPCC report definitely provided a stark warning and hopefully a bit of a reality check for many people, organisations, whether it's countries or businesses around the world. And you can see there was certainly a change in tone and tack from previous reports. We're obviously entering a critical stage, and we need to see more action and less talk. It does feel still like we're sleepwalking into this, and actually we need to see, as I said, a lot more action. I just think I'd echo the points that some of the other panelists have made about the need for a clear roadmap. I think it's been great to see the private sector and actually a growing number of cases that the public sector taking the lead on setting ambitious targets and providing that kind of innovation to spark either the debate or the action. But from the governments, we need to see, and especially those that have got the biggest emitters, the people that are contributing the most to the problem. We need to see a lot more and people doing their fair share. Clear roadmaps which underpin the commitments, I think, is key, and policies and which are aligned to that, and helping to encourage investment into this whole topic. In short, we just need strong climate leadership, and hopefully that's going to come very shortly.
Brilliant, Joe.
The risk of being in violent agreement with everybody. Action, not words, I think is the critical thing. And just to, I guess, to be specific for built environment, what we'd want to see, a national retrofit strategy and associated, regulation and funding streams to go along with that, and also commitments to net zero carbon new buildings in operational energy by 2030, and also targets to address embodied carbon that I'd mentioned before as well.
Brilliant, Jo. And Charlie, last but not least.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I completely agree. Details on policy and regulation for buildings to stimulate the demand that we were talking about earlier, so that people can invest in the skills that we need for the supply chain. And then also consideration around a just transition. So how will support be provided for those groups that don't have the resources or abilities to access the funding themselves? And then I also think it's really important that it's framed in a positive focus on the opportunities that this can all generate. I think there's nothing better than bringing people along with you with that kind of upbeat and positivity, as well as reaffirming the urgency of the situation.
Absolutely, Charlie. And this is the first COP with a dedicated finance day as well, because we do need to pay for some of this and think about different ways to bring in crowd in other capital. So we've had some brilliant questions coming in already. So let me jump up on the first one here. So the first one I had in was from Michael Lynch, which was around how important or what dependency we will have on smart grids in the future. Do we think we have the right people with the right skills in place to make sure there's a joined up plan or strategy for this? And I think that's probably one for you in the first instance.
Okay, so for me, the dependency is critical, and again, I think we just got to take a wee second just to define the smart grid. So, the grid already is, is robust. It provides a security supply, so that's really important. We can't lose that, and that's one of the things that's probably, the UK is very good at. I think when we talk about smart technology, we've got to probably think about behind the meter technology. With more organisations and people wanting to take greater control of their energy lives. They're getting more connectivity, heat pumps, battery storage, PV panels, potentially vehicle to grid. We can't have the network stopping that transition and progress. So I think, smart is going to be critical, but a lot of it will be, the network embracing some of the technology that sits behind the meter and trusting it to control and ensure we maintain a secure network, which is imperative. We can't compromise that. But, there's a lot of things happening in the networks, but there's also a lot of things that still need to happen. Even visibility of power flow at the LV network area is critical. So, the next price control for network operators are probably going to be more focused on that, about building blocks and foundation transition to the smart grid, but it's imperative. And I think there's companies emerging that can provide the technology. They just need a platform to be able to use it and excel in it. So the skills are there, people are there to invest, and we just need to probably get, we need to be risk aware rather than risk averse. There's a complete difference, when you're risk averse, you don't move forward. When you're risk aware, you take, leaps forward. So the smart grid's critical in my mind.
Brilliant. So the next one we have is from Emma Hutchinson. So moving from gas central heating to air source heat pumps, particularly electric ones, is going to be more expensive to those expensive to run for those living in homes. This is due to different cost in gas and electricity. How do we avoid pushing families further into fuel poverty? And I guess, Mark, that might be one for you to tackle first, and anyone else wants to chip in after.
Yeah, thanks. The question is right. Under current financial circumstance, there is a disparity between the cost of gas and electricity, but I think government has recognised that, and I think there was a commitment this week or last week to start to address that over the medium term. So I still believe that there is an opportunity for us to, in a typical Greater Manchester house, for us to do a reasonable amount of retrofit together with potentially battery storage, and for those properties that can take it, PV. And the PV isn't necessarily to reduce the carbon, but that's to reduce the operational cost to the user. And we think that that can be done for less than 20,000. And we think that that's the opportunity to be able to start thinking of as homes as energy systems in themselves. So I've said a lot of things in there about what I think and ifs and buts, but a lot of the work that we're doing suggests that seems like a sensible solution. One of the points I'd probably want to make on Ewan's question around smart grids is I do think this needs to be planned. I think as we become more decarbonised and decentralised in our energy network, the interrelationship between energy infrastructure, built infrastructure, and transport infrastructure becomes ever more complex and ever more interrelated. And I do think we need local energy plans to be able to map out future supply and demand and make the most of, and also create the economic potential, the viability to be able to invest in some of these schemes, because it's only when you start looking at the interactions that you can create economically viable propositions. So I do think that there is an issue about moving everybody onto heat pumps. I think there's other opportunities around heat networks, some of which could be fueled by hydrogen fuel cells. But I do think the majority of people will need to electrify their heat in some form or other. And we need to find a viable financial solution to make that happen. And currently there is a negative NPV. And so what we need is financial institutions to be able to invest in low carbon now, provide financial wherewithal to invest in the capital now, and pay back over the long term. And I think that's one of the key things that we haven't spoken about yet. How do we finance the transition?
Great point. And does anyone else on the panel like to come in on that point there?
I'll just jump in on the financing. I think it's, you know, it's a great point and a very relevant point. You know, as an organisation, you know, we're ready to invest in the green future, you know, and actually, you know, working with organisations to, you know, who are there for the long term. We're here for the long term. You've got to take that long term view in terms of financing the infrastructure that's necessary to transition us in the time that's necessary. But the holistic approach is entirely right, as Mark says. You know, you can't do one thing without considering the impact on wider society and other aspects of the kind of energy vector. So totally agree with that. And you know, it requires a step change in thinking. You know, at the moment we rely on grants. Some of the questions, where's the money coming from? It's not going to come. You know, we all pay for that, and at the end of the day. But we need to think about, you know, institutions, you know, that invest, pay tax, that puts it back into society. So we've got to think about this, you know, how this, you know, benefits the circular economy and a just transition for all.
And I think
we remiss of me not like Charlie coming on the finance questions. So,
yeah, so absolutely looking at the financing of it, but it's got to be affordable for people to be able to pay that money back as well if they're borrowing from us. So how do we structure that in a sensible manner? So again, we're working across various pilots to look at, you know, what makes sense, how can we unlock this for people, and you know, who else needs to play their part in setting that up for success.
Brilliant. So I'll take one more audience question here. Oh, sorry, which is from Audrey Fearing. She raises 2 points. Firstly, the apprenticeship levy remains untapped and could be used to effectively fund training. Businesses with surplus levy could use to transfer their surplus, but also using tax as a lever to encourage investment in space. So retrofitted buildings can be taxed at the zero rate, both on products and materials, also the labour. I guess probably Joe might be best placed to handle so the policy leaves of this one, and what the UK GBC are lobbying government on these. And then Jamie, if you've got any views on what your customers might think about this.
Yeah, thanks, Rishi. Yes, absolutely. We need to see some structural changes in the kinds of incentives and tax that to really drive action in this space. So UK GBC is calling for things like differential stamp duty, which would be dependent on the energy efficiency of the home, because we feel this would be a really significant driver in order to you know, around awareness and action on retrofit of existing homes, and indeed on new build as well. So yeah, I'd say absolutely there's a lot that can be done through significant structural carrots to really drive action, and things like the VAT issue. Yeah, that's obviously been a European issue before now, that we couldn't have a zero rate on a VAT on retrofit products, but now we're out of the EU. I understand that we can have that 0% VAT on retrofit materials, so we'd like to see that coming in as well.
Yeah, I think tax rises for Boris Johnson might be a delicate subject at the moment, given his manifesto pledge. But I personally would like to see more kind of, I guess, I don't know if you call it innovation, but you know, you think about the fact that some of the points that have been made. I think there is plenty of capital to deploy in this area, and I think what we need to do is think about how we simplify that and make it accessible for people, because you know, the technology's there, but maybe the commercial models and the way in which that is structured, I think maybe is a prohibitor. On the point around the apprenticeship levy and whether or not it could be transferred, I do think it should be. If it's unused, why would we not utilise that? For all the reasons that we've spoken about today, there's clearly a shortage of skills, and we need to try everything we can do to overcome that particular challenge.
Great, and I've got one last question that's sort of coming through as a theme from both Andrew Dexter, from Chris Mackenzie-Grieve, around the cost and funding to retrofit your own homes and to put this in. I think it probably covers local. I'm bringing Mark on this one, Ewan on some of the solutions, and then Charlie on some of the finance, if that makes sense. So what's already available, and how do we make this easier for householders to act now? We've talked about the urgency. So Mark, do you want to go first on that? Or Ewan, do you want to go off mute on first? Do you want to off first? Right. So you can go first, and then Mark, and then Charlie.
Okay, so Mark made the point earlier. You've got to look at that whole house retrofit, and if you do it, in a one go, that reduces the cost significantly. You've got to think of it. It's quite right. If you look at PV, storage, and heat, all those things working together through the year should make a valuable contribution to reducing the overall cost. And as suppliers like ourselves, we've got to look at the tariffs that support that and make it easy for people to make the transition and fix their costs in the longer term. Also recognising the value of the PV and the estate, and also come back to the financing question. We're talking just about retrofitting homes, and we had a question about the smart grid. Well, actually, the more assets you have in properties, there could be leveraging those assets to sell other services to the wider market that further reduce the costs. Local energy exchanges, peer-to-peer trading. That's not as far away as we think. We just need to move towards it, but you need the assets in the ground. So yeah, that's a question I get asked all the time. Can you give me a cheap tariff to run a heat pump? Well, actually, I can't. Because if I give you a cheap tariff, I won't actually be in business like we've seen in the last few weeks. So we have to be reflective of the costs and be responsible in how we take it forward, but make it achievable so that people can trust that they can make the transition.
Mark, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, so I think there will always be a requirement for some public subsidy to lift people out of fuel poverty. I think particularly those homes, social homes, which are still in public ownership, we need to see those as a public asset for public good. And the public sector needs to fund that transition and start there to make the case for the market and to prove what the art of the possible is. So the question that I mentioned earlier about 20K, that's to get an existing home to near to carbon neutral, not exactly carbon neutral, but not far away. And I think the more that we can do that at scale, the cost will come down. There will be an aggregation issue and hopefully reduce that cost. I think when you're talking about able to pay customers, some recent survey work suggests that about 30% of people in the next 5 years in Greater Manchester want to make some form of retrofit. That's not full retrofit, that's some form of retrofit. But what puts them off is they don't know where to start, they don't know who to trust, and they don't know where to get the funding from. So we are going to try and launch a Retrofit Accelerator, which tries to address all of those 3 points into the market and create a trusted offer, not because we want to we want to subvert the market, but because we want to drive that market. We want to create that demand for almost like create a trusted a trusted customer, trusted client to be able to know what they want, know what the benefits are, and understand how they can fund it and do that in a way that they have trust in the people who are helping to deliver it.
Yeah, and I think absolutely that part of for those that can pay 100%, it is a real lack of clarity around what are their options and what should they be considering. So the coalition that we're a part of, we're actually bringing a report out very much focused on how the consumer needs support, and it comes down to real nuances around the type of building that you live in, or the type of building that you own, even as a sort of commercial real estate operator, as to what the most appropriate solution is for the retrofit before you even get close to looking at what financing there is available to support. So I think absolutely that clarity and the trust then about who they go to get the works done needs to be addressed as really key parts of this retrofit piece.
So we've had so many more questions coming in, and we're unfortunately not going to get to all of them today. I understand the answers to the polls and responses will be sent to people along with the recording. It's been an absolutely excellent discussion. I really want to thank the panelists for a lively discussion, sharing their views and thoughts on this. we hope these points will raise industry awareness and influence policy. One of the questions was, what would you do if you're Prime Minister? And I think the first thing is we want this policy to be announced. We've all been waiting and sitting on our hands for too long. We need, time is now, time is for actions, not words, as I think Joe very eloquently put earlier. And we need to influence policy to help relation to the skills gap challenge. There are people looking for jobs now. There are young people who want to do these jobs, young and older people want to do these jobs. The sessions have been recorded, and I'm going to hand back to Lee, but I must thank our panelists who have been excellent and open and shared their views today. So huge thank you in the usual way on Zoom, and I'll hand back to Lee to wrap up.
Thank you so much, Rishi. That was an absolutely fantastic event. Thanks all for your contribution. I thought it was really, really interesting. And I think, having COP26 around the corner just enables us to really focus our minds on the issue and on the transition to low carbon economy. And I do think, like everybody said today, there is such an urgency. There are a lot of skills needed. I like the idea that you're saying that it starts in the boardroom, that it starts with designers, engineers as well. It's looking right from the beginning of town planning all the way through to post-construction, which is so important. There are people out there to do these jobs. We need to employ. We have young people that it needs to appeal to. So that's an interesting concept, to really appeal to the younger, the next generation, because the technology is there as well. It needs to be interesting to them, but we have got people that can do these jobs. So I think it's a joined up mission. It seems like, you all talked about bringing the stakeholders together. Government's got clearly a big role to play, as we're all saying. Policy and regulation needs to be there. It can be a bit confusing as to what an individual person or household can do. So I think you're absolutely right in coming out of COP. There needs to be a roadmap with sort of stepwise missions and aims and goals, and something that everybody can understand. And, to finance it, to finance retrofit is a major issue at the moment, and we all need to come together for that single aim. So no, that was really fantastic. It was fascinating. As Rishi said, we're going to be creating an output from this. So we'll try and put as much information in a coherent way to circulate, and also the results of our polls. Now, I do have the results here, so I can tell you and read from this very quickly here. So where we started with our first poll, what do you think is the biggest skill shortage to achieving net zero buildings? Now, 63% said construction skills using modern net zero building methods. 29% qualified retrofit designers and architects. Only 5% saying qualified installers of heat pumps. 3% climate consultants. Then to the second one, what do you think the government should be doing more of to support the decarbonisation of the built environment? So 45%, I think, agree with most of the panel on providing grants and sufficient funding, but 29% also said to provide clear guidance to the construction sector, which is obviously important. 17% subsidised for free training programmes to bridge skills gaps, and 9% work with councils to build a net zero infrastructure. And as we said, collaboration between the private and public sector is absolutely paramount in this. And lastly, have you moved to a renewable energy tariff in your own home? Now, I was watching this as it was moving from yes and no to, where the biggest numbers were. We've ended today with 57% saying yes and 43% saying no. I'm sure the will's there. I'm sure it's the understanding of what you can do and the cost, as we've all said today. So actually, we'll circulate that to you all. But thank you finally from us at Movers and Shakers, and of course to NatWest, who are doing a tremendous job in this space to really champion, banking and the finance sector in terms of this transition to low carbon. Good luck to everyone at COP. I hope we get out of it what we want and what we all need. So thank you from me. Do log on again on October the 14th for our Build to Rent event, which is going to be with JLL. Our November in-person events are happening across the UK, obviously next month. So we'll be starting in London, and we'll be looking at the creative industries and planning ahead in terms of investment and development. And we'll be looking at homes and communities in the Southwest, the Northwest and the West Midlands. Do find out more. We hope to see you in person and are back virtually. Thank you very much. Have a great day.